My name is Matt Distel. I'm the exhibitions director here at the Carnegie, and I'm joined here tonight with my curatorial colleagues, Johanna Jackson and Derrick Velasquez, and we're just going to do a little bit of conversation, sort of a little bit of an introduction to the project, tell you a little bit about how we went about putting this show together, and it's going to be very, very casual and hopefully a little weird. The show's called Dynamics of Flow, and we wanted to create an exhibition that was a bit of a dialogue between different mediums. So I know this is NCECA, this is this big ceramic conference, right? When Cal and Pam approached me about the exhibition, and the exhibition being here at the Carnegie that was in conjunction with the NCECA conference, I thought about it and I immediately thought of Johanna's ceramic work. That was sort of my initial sort of thought. I was like, oh, well, what if that was like a base of something? And at some point, Mr. Bill Rentschler, he's back there, he suggested I go over and look at some paintings. And I started thinking like, oh man, these paintings really have a dialogue with the ceramic work that I was looking at from Johanna. And I started to think about, well, that would be an interesting pairing. But that's a lot of work to fill up a space like this. So I started thinking about, well, what if we bounce back and forth between painting and ceramics? And then, as is my wont, I did not want to do that by myself. So I invited Johanna and then found Derrick. And what we did is we went back and forth selecting works that were responding to the previous work. And so alternating between painting and ceramics, until we felt like we filled up the entire building. So that's what happened. The show is meant, quote unquote, meant to be accessed sequentially, the way that we selected the work, but you know, you can go, just look at art, it's fine. You can look at anything and draw your own connections. But so, I guess I'm moderating, but I wanted to say, it was just a real pleasure to sort of go through this process with these guys, because it was really fun to think about why they made a certain selection, and then things were kind of like, sometimes we throw each other curveballs, and by the end we all end up with things that maybe aren't painting or ceramics, but that seemed totally fine as well. So, Johanna. You were the first selection after responding to your own work. Can you talk a little bit about how and why you selected Sarah's work?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Well, there's Chris and my tables, and I think of those as us selecting each other and kind of being in a loop. So they don't count. Then comes the pot, and I felt that Sarah's work felt like broken, and it felt like it was engaging elements of the reified liquid, which I think is like central to my own interest in clay, and femme coloration, and studio dirt. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It's also deceptive because it is a painting. People look at that piece on the back wall there and think it's a ceramic piece. It's silicone, so it's rubberized. It's a floppy piece. So it's like a Trompe l'oeil ceramic work or something like that. Yeah. And then, in response to Sarah's work, Derrick was tasked with selecting a ceramic piece to respond to Sarah's painting. And what was your process for that?
Matt, thank you for inviting me. Because, you know, one thing I've always wanted to do was infiltrate NCECA. I'm not a ceramicist, but I've always wanted to. I went to graduate school at Ohio State. I live in Denver now, but I'm familiar with Ohio and kind of that ceramics world. And the ceramics community has always been very welcoming. Like, I hung out more with ceramicists than I did sculptors or painters or any other kind of people in whatever mediums they were in. And I was able to continue those relationships. I've heard about NCECA for like 15 years, so to be able to come to one, but also co-organize an exhibition has been like a real joy of like seeing how this community comes together and being able to bring other artists in kind of different mediums and other aesthetics, and the show's been really cool. I selected Marcia's work because I was kind of, I think I was making some pretty formal comparisons to shape, these things that are kind of stacked on top of each other. Sarah's work is this long, almost like, kind of like tuning fork with almost like a flower-ish or a spade shape on top of it, and that immediately made me think of Marcia's work, who stacks these kind of like blob forms on top of each other, but then imbues them with a lot of background imagery with flowers kind of relating to her background, but the objects still hold and create that weight in the piece. Even though there's a lot going on, I have a number of Marcia's pieces because I know her from Denver, and now she's in Columbus. And also, to some degree, it was being able to curate shows like this allows me to work with people who I've wanted to work with or know, or reach out to people who I don't know very well. But I know Marcia pretty well from Denver. And some of it was legitimately, like, the logistics of getting NCECA going is bananas to me. And Marcia was in Columbus, and I'm like, okay, you don't have to like ship a ton of work. Like, I can't even, every single one of these shows is kind of insane to me for ceramics and NCECA, and it happens every year, and it's like a very kind of like group hug experience to make it happen. So that's how I kind of think about inviting Marcia.
And then, we'll kind of just go around this room a little bit, and then maybe we can open up some questions and talk a little bit maybe about some of the things upstairs, right? So then my response, so Marcia also has these backdrops that have, these like sort of lovely, lush, sort of spa environments. And my instinct there was to kind of counter that with Bill's work that is, I happen to know that Bill observes a dead plant quite routinely to paint from. And I thought that was like kind of a humorous sort of like, turn, was to take these sort of lifeless branches that Bill sort of gives life to, but that gesture felt like kind of funny to me. The paintings are very lush and beautiful, but also they have this sort of, I don't know how to sort of indicate the sensibility that I feel when I look at these paintings, but it's a bit melancholy at times, I think. And I get a lot from them, but I thought that there was a formal relationship between sort of the living and the dead plant in those works. And then the next selection was a real pleasure to work with Richard Shaw, and that was Johanna's selection. Want to talk about him?
Yes. Yes, I picked the Richard Shaw from these amazing paintings. I was also thinking about the dead plant, and I was thinking that they were sort of non-elevated art, like very humble art, or not art world, not hungry art, which I really like and I really appreciate. Also, I was working straight up with the colors, like the colors to the colors, formally, always. But when I met these pieces in real life, they are really different, and they don't feel dead planty. They feel death aware, but they feel really on the move. They feel kind of like, to me, like having my fingers pressed into my eyelid, and the imagery that comes from that. So much movement that I feel like gets still with Richard. So it's a contrast as well as, yeah. And then Richard's work is so hardworking and so, rigorous craft. but it has a messiness too. It has an elevation of the super modest, or maybe it's also not elevated in a way that I really relate to.
I think they're both rooted in observation as well.
Yeah.
And then the figurative elements of Richard's work is maybe what you responded to, Derrick, at least initially?
Yeah, I was looking at a few things. I was using the color as well, so sometimes I feel like we really chose based off color, which is great. And so you can see kind of the flow of the show. I was looking at color, and I was also thinking about structure, how these things, how these objects in Shaw's piece kind of are stacked. I thought that there was kind of a language of structure there to make them whole, they're all kind of bonded together. And then when I was thinking about Alana's work, I thought there is a structure of language in her work, and it was kind of almost like a play off of, she uses individual words or like phrases, and then she comes up with some sort of like idiosyncratic way of formalizing that into almost like data, but this kind of very painterly gesture of making. And so I was looking at color, pure form, but also this, again, this kind of like play on like language and stacking, and the way that she paints them and builds these things up.
Was there any other things that you guys sort of observed about like the process of selecting the work that was curious or fun or you hated?
I was excited about the space, just because I love architectural ornamentation, and it was hard to think of. I've been in a number of Carnegie buildings, and they're always grand, or like grand but small, or grand but large, and I couldn't get a hold of how the show would look until we got here, because there's the bottom space, and then there's all these other chopped up rooms, and where each individual room has its own kind of conversation going on because of the way that we selected things, which I think is cool, like seeing it in the reel. And then beyond that, just trying to understand the size of the room and the building was fun. It's quirky. Like I could tell from the beginning when you sent me the image where you could walk around, I was like using the 3D modeling to see how big these rooms are. I was like, that doesn't seem right, but we're gonna put this in here, or we're gonna try to put this thing in here. And that space between, because it is pretty big, and some of the works we have are not that large, being able to play, which we trusted you with completely, just, spacing of everything feels really beautiful as well in the space, in relationship to the space.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have at play here is the Carnegie's a big space, and I think it's fun to sort of let the work have a lot of space to breathe, and the work holds up to it too.
Yeah, I never thought about the space that it was going to. It was like each piece is its own planet or something, and small is the same as big if you really pay attention to it. It made me aware when I came here and saw the building and saw the pieces that I chose in it. I was like, oh, I like small things.
It was really fun, and I think we also served the work well. I mean, the artist might have something to say about that too, but I think we really tried to give each work like its own room and space to breathe, and not. I know we're talking about the connections we're drawing, and we're sort of using that as the overlay, but all the work stands on its own as well, and I think you can draw connections. You can draw just as many connections between, the work upstairs to work downstairs. It's not so rigid, the conceit is rigid, I guess, but the way that it's finally executed feels pretty fluid.
Yeah, even this Oculus, it feels like it just does this, and you do. When you walk through the space, you go up these stairs that kind of wind. You get to walk kind of around the Oculus, and maybe you don't go exactly where you're supposed to go to some degree. So it does this quite a bit in the building, the way that, a building like this would be designed for people to come to, or a library, and then its other uses. It's meant to circulate, and I think that circulation really comes through both via the work and the way that we chose it, in addition to just, the way this building
there any questions or anything anybody wants to yell at us? Anything we did wrong?
I have some questions.
Yeah.
So there's Richard Shaw and Betty Woodman in this show, who are just Grand Slam ceramic artists. And I mean, are these, I guess just the availability of them is amazing. And so I'm curious how the selection process went as far as availability and having things on loan. Because it's just great to see them, and I feel like they must be hard to obtain.
When I wanted I wanted Richard to be in it, I contacted his gallery and they were like, oh no, I don't know. And then I just contacted him and he made it happen and he packed it himself.
Yeah.
He's like a man who lives with his work.
He's a damn delight to work with, too. And the Betty Woodman came from 2 collections that are nearby, which was really great to have access to that. And, yeah, people were just very generous with lending work. And I think that's another sort of strategy of the exhibition and the Carnegie in general, is to try to, mix people who are, at different stages in their careers. And I think that's what works really well in this particular exhibition.
Yeah, like the Betty Woodman is so cool. Like Johanna and I were just like looking at it for like 10 minutes and just talking about it. But Betty Woodman is somebody who has connections to Boulder and Colorado as well. Like she has works in the the airport, and also I know people who have like her candy, like almost like test candy bowls as well in their small collections in Denver. So she kind of, her work, I don't know, for like a better term, became available in a lot of collections that are accessible, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Your thoughts, concerns, comments?
Dower.
Don't it like them?
Yeah, I know, like I'm trying to get people to, yell at us, but they're not doing it. All right, well, we're here, we'd love to talk about the work. There are quite a few artists in the show that are here right now. Marcia, Michael, who else is here? I saw Bill walk in. A few others, but yeah. So thanks so much for coming, and everybody have a drink and enjoy yourselves. All right, thanks.
Thank you.